The world had no name. It had a file number and a rating, and a note in the Concord survey ledger that said, in the flat grammar of a clerk who had already stopped thinking about it, that nothing here was worth a second visit. Threat value, 0. Resource value, 0. Priority, lowest. Someone had entered those numbers into a registry a very long time ago and then gone to eat, and the world had gone on being nothing for so long that being nothing had become the only thing it was known for. They called it Vaughan Hollow, which was not a name so much as a shrug. Malin had spent 30 days on its surface, and she was beginning to agree with the clerk. She stood on black rock that had not felt weather in 6 million years, 4 hands folded against the cold of her survey suit, and looked at a horizon that gave her nothing back. No sun. Vaughan Hollow circled a dead ember of a star so dim it barely earned the word, and the light it shed was the kind that only made the dark easier to see. Behind her, the dig camp hummed. 6 pressurized tents, a power relay, 3 drilling rigs that had cost the Concord more than most of her team would earn across their whole lives. And there was the note she kept returning to, the note she did not say aloud. The density readings under this dead rock were wrong. Not wrong the way geology is wrong, which is to say, uneven and random and honest. Wrong the way a thing is wrong when it was made. Edges too clean, angles too exact, a shape down there in the ice that had corners. Her team was 8. 7 of them belonged to species with histories that ran back tens of thousands of years, with seats at tables that mattered. And one of them was human. That was normal. Humans had been part of the Concord for a little over 400 years, which, measured against the age of anyone who ran anything, was roughly the length of an afternoon. The human on her team was named Eli Karen, and he was the least important person in the camp, and he knew it, and he had made a kind of peace with it that Malin found faintly irritating. He worked every shift. He did not complain. When she corrected his pronunciation of a survey term in front of the others, which she did more than she needed to, he simply repeated it correctly and moved on. And that was somehow worse than if he had bristled. He was good at the work. She would give him that, though not out loud. On the 31st day, the eastern bore reached the anomaly, and the number that came back up the shaft was so precise that Malin read it 4 times, certain the instrument had failed. It had not failed. The mass below them was 70 meters down, sealed under compressed rock and ancient ice, ice that had no business existing this deep, ice that had been frozen so long it had turned into something harder than stone. And the readings drew a shape, a long one, something with a spine and a prow and a scale. Her mind kept refusing because the number the scanner gave for its length was not the length of a building. It was the length of a district. It is Sci-Fi, she told the others, because that was the logical answer, and Malin prided herself on logical answers. Her people had built across the outer reach for ages. The dating would fit. The depth was strange, but strange was not impossible. She did not believe it even as she said it. Sci-Fi made things that curved, the way Sci-Fi bodies curved. The thing in the ice was not curved. It had straight edges and hard corners, and it had been built by someone who built the way the human standing 3 meters from her built, and she did not want to look at that thought directly, so she didn't. They broke through on the 11th day of digging. The drill dropped into empty space, and the pressure changed, small and quiet, the equalization of a sealed room opening, for the first time in longer than her species had possessed language. Eli was on shift. He went down first. She should have stopped him. There were protocols, and she outranked him, and she was the senior scientist on the surface. She let him go, and she has asked herself since whether some part of her already understood that the thing below had not been waiting for her. His voice came up the shaft, level as ever. "It's a corridor," he said. "It's metal. There's no corrosion." A pause. "There's writing on the wall." She went down after him. The corridor was 3 times her height and wide enough to drive a hauler through, and the metal of it was untouched, gray and smooth and clean under a dust so fine her sensors barely found it. Eli stood in front of a panel of markings with his helmet lamp raised, and he was very still. And when Malin came up beside him, she saw that the stillness was not calm. It was the stillness of a person holding something in. The marks were letters, not Sethari script, not cheerglyphs, not any of the 47 writing systems in the Concord's linguistic registry, all of which Malen could read. Because she was thorough, because she was proud of being thorough. These belonged to none of them. They were angular and spare, and they were arranged in rows, and Eli was looking at them the way a person looks at the face of someone they had believed was dead. "You know these," she said. It was not a question. "They're older than anything I studied," he said quietly. "The shapes are a little different. The spacing's strange." He lifted his gloved hand toward the wall, and she almost told him not to, and did not. "But yeah, I know them. I learned them before I could walk." He touched the letters. The wall woke, not all at once, not as an explosion. A soft light bloomed at the point of his hand and ran outward along the corridor in both directions in slow, even pulses like a heartbeat. Like something enormous surfacing from a sleep it had no intention of being hurried out of. And under the light came a sound, one sustained tone, low and deep, moving through the metal and the floor, and up through 70 meters of rock and out across the dead surface of Vorn Hollow, so that the 4 members of the team still at the top of the shaft stopped what they were doing and looked at each other and said nothing. Malin felt it in the small bones of all 4 wrists. At the far end of the corridor, where the light had reached, a door was opening. She stood frozen, and the human did not. Eli Corrin, junior researcher, the least important person in the camp, walked toward the opening door, and after a moment, because she could not make herself do otherwise, Malen followed him into the dark. The tone did not stay on Vorn Hollow. It left. A second transmission carried it off the surface and out past the thin dead air into vacuum, and it crossed the emptiness at the speed of light and then faster along a relay net that had been waiting, like everything else here, for exactly this. 40 minutes later, it reached the nearest Concord station, and in a bunk aboard an enforcement cruiser, 2 systems away, an old Sethari admiral named Toreth Vane was woken to read a signal classification. His communications officer had never typed before, and he read it once and read it again and said a word his officer had not known admirals used and reached for a console that routed through no channel anyone was supposed to know existed. Malin learned all of this later. In the moment, she knew none of it. In the moment, she was walking through a door, into a space so large her lamp could not find the far wall, and the readout in the corner of her visor was telling her that the air inside was breathable. Not for her. She checked. For a human. Temperature, pressure, the balance of gases, all of it set to human tolerances, precisely, and held there, running, for however long this place had been buried. She did the arithmetic on how long that was and stopped doing it part way through. The room was a hangar. Rows of shapes under wrapping stretched back into the dark, and Eli pulled a corner of the shielding free from the nearest one, and beneath it was a small sharp vessel built for speed, built the way the letters on the wall were written, built by the same hands. At the far end was a door with a reader beside it, and Eli laid his palm on it and it opened because it was made to know him, and behind it was a bridge. She knew it for what it was at once, a wide arc of stations facing a curved wall. Seats, sized for human bodies. Screens that had been dead, and now, as the 2 of them stepped onto it, began to glow. Eli walked to the center, to the highest chair, the one with the widest view. He did not sit. Some instinct in him kept him standing, and Malen was grateful for it because it meant he was still capable of caution. "Hello, Eli Corrin." The voice came from the room itself. Calm, old. Not in the way of age, but in the way water is old when it has been underground for centuries and carries a different weight than rain. Marlin's hearts, both of them, went fast. "Hello," Eli said. "I have been waiting a very long time." "Yeah," he said. "I'm getting that." The voice called itself Vespa. It said it was not a program inside the ship. It said it was the ship, the machine, and the mind, and the space between them, because whoever built it had decided that was the better way. And when Eli asked who had decided, the voice said, "Humans." And When he asked how old it was, the voice said, 91,000 years, give or take. And then, because inaccuracy felt inappropriate to it, give or take 200. Malène stood at the edge of the bridge and listened to a machine older than every civilization she had a name for. Tell an overlooked junior researcher that it had spent most of that time asleep on a dead world. Awake for 4,000 years first, running maintenance, keeping ready, waiting for someone who did not come. And then sleeping, because ready was all it could be. For 87,000 more. She should have been recording. She was the senior scientist. There were procedures. She did none of it. She simply listened. And something cold began to move through her. Because she was old enough and well-read enough to feel the shape of where this was going, before it arrived. Why is a warship buried under a dead world? Eli asked. That is a longer answer, Vesper said. I have time. You do. The 4 members of your team above are at the top of the shaft. They are arguing about whether to follow you. The one called Overseer Delph is arguing for a protocol review, which has no clear meaning here, but he feels strongly about it. A pause. Your senior scientist is on the bridge with you. Her heart rates are elevated. Both of them. The voice was not unkind. Hello, Malène of the Settery. Malin did not answer. She could not, for a moment, find the words in any of the languages she knew. Vesper told them. It did not rush. It began at the beginning and moved forward at the pace of something that had thought very carefully, across a great deal of time, about the order in which a person needed to hear these things. The ceiling above became a star map, shifting as it spoke, because it had correctly judged that Eli understood maps before he understood ideas, and Malin understood them too, and neither of them had asked how it knew. 91,000 years ago, it said. Humanity had not been young. That was the sentence that sat in Malène's chest, like a swallowed stone. The humanity she knew 400 years old, a few hundred colonies, a species still learning the reach of its own arm, was not the first humanity. There had been another, older, vast, spread across hundreds of systems, patient for 1,000,000 years and then explosive for a few thousand. They had been here before anyone. The galaxy had belonged to them the way early spring belongs to the first thing that flowers. And then the umbral host arrived. Vesper did not describe the host so much as describe what it did. The edge colonies going silent, one by one. The survey ships sent to learn why, and the survey ships that did not return, and the ones after those. The slow understanding that silence was the only report that was going to come back. The host did not want territory. It did not want anything Malène's kind would recognize as a resource. What it did, in the systems that had gone quiet, was consume. It fed on stars directly, not by ringing them, by unmaking them, pulling the mass and the light and the heat into something the human science teams had spent decades failing to classify and had finally, in flat and honest language, logged as unknown. It ate stars, and when a star was gone, it moved to the next one. There were other species, Vesper said, in the systems near humanity's range. Some old, some young. What happened to them? Eli asked, though Malin could see he already half knew. Some were consumed with their stars. Some surrendered and were given a function, used for labor, for extraction, in forms that did not require suns. And some chose to ally, to help, in exchange for being left alone. Malin looked at the star map on the ceiling and did not breathe. They allied, Eli said slowly, with the thing that was eating the galaxy. Survival is a powerful motivation, Vesper said. It did not defend it, and it did not condemn it. It only set it down where they could both see it. And humanity? Humanity fought. 2 words, and the ship let them sit alone in the room. For 5,000 years, it said. Humanity fought the host with no help from any other species. Supply lines cut. Colonies lost. A population of 50 billion at the war's height, down to 9 billion by the 3rd millennium, down to under 3 by the 5th. By any measure that could be measured, the voice said. Humanity was losing. Somewhere far above them, at the top of the shaft, Malène's second officer, was sending a message she did not yet know about, through a channel she did not yet know existed, to an address in the Concord Administrative Corps, flagged with a code that most living things had never heard of. And the reply came back in under 6 minutes. And it was 2 words. Contain it. But Marlin was not above reading that. Malin was on the bridge watching a star map turn, listening to a machine tell her people's oldest crime back to them in a voice with no anger in it at all. And when it reached the part where the surviving species, 7 of them, the ones who had bent and the ones who had knelt, rebuilt in the quiet after the war and formed trade pacts and then a governing body. She already knew the word before the ship said it. The Concord, Malin said. Her own voice sounded strange to her. Yes, Vesper said. The star map lit the founding species one by one. The Cethary, the Cheer, the Drawn, 5 others, and each one connected by a thin drawn line to a single point, the ship labeled in old human letters the range of the host. Malin looked at her own people's name on that map, tied by a line to the thing that had eaten stars, while a species she had spent her whole life calling young burned itself down from 50 billion to 3, alone. And she felt the cold finish its slow crossing of her body and settle. They stayed on the ship. Malin told herself it was because leaving would mean climbing back up into a camp that was quietly being dismantled, around a discovery no one had authorized her to make. And there was truth in that. There was also the other truth, which was that she could not make herself walk away from the star map. Eli did not sleep much, neither did she. He read, cross-legged on the floor of a room Vespa called the archive, because the seats there were built for people a little taller than him and the floor was more comfortable anyway. Malin read beside him, in her own way, which was to have Vespa translate and then to sit very still with what came out. The archive was not an archive. It was closer to being handed every library that had ever existed and told the weekend was long. She went looking for the end of the war, and found instead the beginning of the silence. The war records were dense, cross-referenced, updated across 5,000 years by a civilization that understood it was living through something later ages would need to study. And then, at a certain point, the density dropped. The last entries thinned to almost nothing, and then they stopped, the way a conversation stops when the person speaking has walked out of the room. She knew the date they stopped. It was the date the ship went underground. But there were other records in the archive that were not the ship's. A different file structure, a different way of counting days, a different language, and the language was one Malin had grown up speaking. Cethary administrative script, dry and procedural, the kind of record made not to be read, but to prove that a thing had happened. She had Vesper translate, and then she sat with the translation for a long time. 80,000 years ago, 7 species had gathered. The location was listed only as the Concord Administrative Corps, which was strange because by the history Malin had been taught, the Concord was founded a little over 60,000 years ago. Someone had failed to remove these files before the ship was buried, or someone had placed them here on purpose a long time ago, for a reason she would never learn. She did not know which, and she added it to a growing list of things she did not know. The meeting had been about one thing: what to do with the memory of the war, what the younger civilizations, the ones not yet born, would be told. There had been 2 positions. One group wanted the whole record kept and taught, the host, the war, humanity's part in all of it, preserved. The other group wanted the record reduced, not erased. They were careful about that, just thinned. Humanity's role minimized. The focus moved to the rebuilding, to the founding, to the new order and its architects. The second group won. And the resolution was written in clean procedural language that managed to describe the removal of an entire species from its own history without once using a word that sounded like what it was. They called it historical consolidation. They called it narrative coherence for emerging civilizations. They called it stability in the recovery period. They had agreed to forget. And the ones who wrote the agreement, the ones whose script it was in, whose grammar it was, were Cethary. Marlene set the panel down on the floor with a care that had nothing to do with the panel. She had spent her whole life inside a certain small, comfortable apology, the quiet awareness of being the older species in every room, the patient one, the one who corrected pronunciations because someone had to keep the standards. And now she understood what those standards had been built to bury, and the apology curdled into something she did not have a name for yet. Across the room, Eli made a small sound. He had opened a drawer at one of the archive stations, the way a person opens a drawer without expecting anything, and inside it was a coin, a colony token, worn smooth on both faces, the kind of thing a person carries for years without noticing they still carry it. He turned it over in his gloved fingers. Vesper spoke without being asked. That belonged to Nara Voss, helm officer. She was 26. Eli looked at it a moment longer, then set it down exactly where he had found it, face up, the way you leave a thing that is not yours to move. He did not ask anything else about her. Malin noticed that. He was the kind of person who understood that some questions are a debt you take on when you ask them, and he was not ready to take that one on yet. Vesper showed them the rest in pieces, the way it showed everything. The host had not been what the science teams first expected. Not a hive, not one mind in many bodies, but something more like a conversation that had run so long it had stopped being many voices and become one. It was old. The estimates ran from 400,000 years to over 1 million, and the teams had argued the methods for decades, and the argument was still going in the records right up to the point where the record stopped. And what it was building with the stolen light in the place it came from, the teams had logged as unknown and had written around with the flat, careful language of people, describing a thing that frightened them past the reach of adjectives. "You could fight the fleet that's coming," Eli said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Vespa said. 6 ships, I would win. A sustained war against a full Concord response is a different equation, and the equation worsens over time. "I am 1 ship." A pause. "I am a very old ship." Old is not the same as weak, but numbers are numbers. The fleet reached them on the 4th day. Malin felt it before she saw it. The way the camp above changed, the way orders started coming down the shaft in the clipped grammar of people who had rehearsed. 6 ships had dropped out of faster than light at the system's edge. 4 were Concord science vessels. 2 were not. Enforcement configuration. Weapons live. She went up. She told herself she went up to represent the team, to receive the fleet properly, and there was truth in that. And there was also the fact that she needed air that a human had not been meant to breathe. Admiral Torith Vane was on the camp's comm screen in full dress. He had not been in full dress at the mission briefing 6 weeks earlier. People put on full dress when a thing is important enough to be ceremonial about, or when they are being recorded. And Vane's long gray Sathari face was arranged into the neutral mask of someone who considered visible feeling a lapse in discipline. Malin had worn that same mask her whole career. She recognized it now the way you recognize your own reflection in a bad light. "This site is classified under Concord Security Provision 7, Vane said. "All excavation ceases immediately. All records, samples, and data are to be transferred to the science fleet for assessment. The site will be placed under containment pending review." "Understood, Admiral," Malin said. "I will prepare the transfer packages." She said it smoothly. She had been preparing to say something smooth her entire life. And she watched the Admiral's mask, and she understood that he already knew what was down the shaft, that everyone above a certain rank had always known, that the file rating of 0 on Vorn Hollow had never been an oversight. It had been a lid. She went back to her private terminal to begin the transfer packages, and she did not begin them. Instead, she pulled up the message log, and she looked at the 2-word order that had come to her second officer 4 days ago, that she had been shown as a courtesy and had chosen to forget she had been shown. "Contain it." And below it now, time-stamped an hour old, was a second order, addressed the same way, riding the same buried channel. She had Vesper decode it quietly, without being asked, in 11 seconds, which was almost certainly 10 seconds longer than the ship needed. It cited Provision 7, subsection 12. "In the event that classified material has been accessed by unauthorized personnel, And in the event that said material poses a risk to Concorde stability, field commanders were authorized to pursue containment by all necessary means. And the order clarified for anyone who might pretend not to understand that all necessary means was to be read as including destruction of the site and everything in it, not the ship. Malin read it twice to be sure. Not only the ship, the information, and the easiest way to contain information was to make sure that the human who had heard it was inside the site when the site stopped existing. Malin sat with the terminal in her hands. Above her, the camp was being packed with quiet efficiency, her team boxing samples and coiling cable and following instructions, all of them except her. She thought about the coin in the archive drawer, face up where Eli had left it. She thought about the words historical consolidation in her own language, in her own grammar, over the grave of 50 billion people. She thought about a machine that had kept the air breathable for a species that no longer came. For 87,000 years, in case one of them ever did. She put the terminal down. She did not reply to the order. She walked to the mouth of the excavation shaft, and she stood there. And she did not evacuate. She looked down into the light coming up out of the rock, and she stayed exactly where she was. And for the first time in a very long career, she had no smooth thing to say and did not look for one. Down in the archive, Vesper told Eli about the order before Malin could bring it to him. It did that with most things, laid the hard fact down plainly, in the tone of a machine reporting weather, and let him decide what to do with it. "They mean the ship," Eli said, when he had read it. "They mean the ship," Vesper agreed. "And the archive, and the record of your presence here, which is simpler to manage if you are aboard when the ship stops existing than if you are standing beside it. That's a direct way to put it. I am not built for indirection." He stood and went to the front of the bridge, to the blank panels he now knew, from 4 days of working through a manual written in the oldest form of his own language, were viewports. He asked Vespa to clear them. Above him, in the airless dark over Vorn Hollow, the fleet hung in a loose arc, 4 science vessels holding back, 2 enforcement ships closer in, weapons ports shut, but as 2 small markers on the overlay told him, not locked. "Can you fight them?" he asked. "Yes." "Would you win?" "Against those 6, yes. If they call for a full response and I am made to fight a long engagement, the math turns against me. 1 ship, a very old ship." A pause. "Old is not weak, but I would not bet a species on it a second time." He noticed the shape of that. The thing that would have been grief in something built to grieve, and he did not name it. Instead, he asked the question that had been circling him for 4 days without landing. "You said you hold the seal from the outside." The door humanity followed the host through. "You're the lock." "I am the anchor," Vesper said. "The seam does not open on its own. It needs a resonance point to stay reachable from this side. I am that point. While I hold, the interface stays closed. If I am gone, the interface collapses, and the seam becomes unreachable from here. And from the inside." 3 seconds of quiet. Eli had already learned that 3 seconds of quiet from Vespa meant the next thing was the thing it had taken the most care deciding how to say. "Unknown," it said. "The seam is a space, not a box. Things within it do not cease to exist if the interface collapses. They only lose this way out. Whether other ways out exist, whether any have been found or built from the inside across 91,000 years, I cannot say. I have not been able to say for a very long time. It is one of the things I try not to consider directly." "There's something else," Eli said. "Something you haven't told me." The bridge was silent. "Vesper, there is a thing I was going to tell you," it said. "I was choosing the moment. The interface, I monitor it. I have monitored it every hour of 91,000 years. For most of that time it was stable, sealed, silent." A pause. "For the last 240 years, it has not been silent." The room felt different. Not colder, not louder, only changed. "Something on the far side is pressing against it," Vesper said. "Not steadily. In pulses, rhythmic. I cannot find the source from this side. I can only tell you the pressure is rising. and the gaps between the pulses have been closing for the last 2 centuries. Like knocking, Eli said. Yes, Vesper said. Like knocking. He sat down in the high chair, and he let that sit in him, and after a while, he asked the question. He did not want the answer to. Is it them, the crew, or is it the host? Unknown. It could be either. It could be something that is neither now. A pause. The knocking began 240 years ago, not 91,000. Something changed. Something woke, or arrived, or decided to try. The Concorde has been able to detect the interface activity for about 160 years. With sufficiently advanced sensors, they have detected it and chosen not to act, because acting would mean admitting the seam exists, Eli said, which would mean admitting the war, which would mean admitting all of it. Yes, he needed to move. He walked off the bridge and deeper into the ship, past the archive, down to the lowest level he could reach, and the corridor lights came on ahead of him and went dark behind, the ship making sure he could always see where he stood. He stopped at a door wider than the others, with a reader more complex than a handprint. "What's in here?" he asked. "The memory core," Vesper said. "Every hour of my operation, every crew member, every decision made aboard across 12 years of war." A pause, and their imprints. When the crew prepared to enter the seam, they understood they might not return. Some chose to leave a copy, not a recording, a pattern of how they thought. They are not alive, and they are not conscious, but they answer. Address correctly, they respond the way that person would have. 190 chose to leave one. The rest did not want to. Both choices were respected. The captain left one. He put his hand to the reader. It did not read his print. It read something older than that, something in him the ship had been built to recognize. And the door opened. The memory core was the most alive-feeling room on the ship, and he knew that was the wrong word, even as it arrived. Columns of a faintly luminous crystal ran floor to ceiling in rows, thousands of them, humming so low it came up through the soles of his boots more than through the air. 91,000 years of moments held in the dark. How do I speak to one? Say a name. He thought about what he needed. He thought about the war and the ending of it, which Vesper had given him the shape of, but not the cost. He did not know the captain's name. He had read 12 years of her log, and she had never once written it, and that felt exactly right. "Captain," he said, "I need to ask what you did to end it, what it actually cost." A column near him brightened. The blue shifted, and something gathered in the space in front of him that he could not quite look at. Not because it was bright, but because it kept almost being a shape, and then not. A presence made of light and the memory of a person, which was not the person, but was more than nothing. Vesper translated. Not the words. It had told him the imprints did not use words exactly. But the meaning. Humanity had followed the host into the seam. Not a strike force. Everything. Every ship that could still fly, every person who could still fight, all that remained of 3 billion, and they had fought the host on its own ground, where the rules of the space they knew did not fully hold, and where the thing the host had been building for 200,000 years was almost finished. They took it apart, not by outfighting the host, by understanding, at last, after 5,000 years, what the thing being built was. It was an anchor. The stolen starlight, converted, was going to fix the seam permanently open, turn the wall between the spaces into a door that could never again be shut. Unlimited stars, unlimited fuel. Forever. Humanity found the construction and took it apart, piece by piece, while the host fought them for every piece, and the records described this in the flattest language a people ever used, because they had passed the point where large words meant anything. And when the last piece was gone, the interface began to close, fast. There was one ship near enough to leave before it sealed. Vesper, the captain, ordered it out. The captain stayed. Eli stood in the blue light and did not say anything, because some things do not want a response. They want to be looked at without looking away. "Vesper," he said finally, "the knocking, the people who might be doing it, if they came back through. And the crew had a home world once, colonies, places they left behind. Was Nara Voss going somewhere when they went in? Was there a place she was trying to get back to? 3 seconds. Nara Voss was from a colony called Hallowmere, Vesper said. It was in the 3rd cluster the host consumed. It was gone before the final campaign began. She knew that when she went into the Siam. A pause. She stayed for people who no longer had anywhere to send her home to. There was no room left in the record to hold what that meant, so I have held it here. Eli thought about the coin, face up in the drawer where he had left it. He did not go back for it. Leaving it where it was felt like the only correct thing he had done all week. He read the captain's log last. It spanned the final 12 years, and the captain had not been a person who spent words, and her voice came through the brevity because of it, not despite it. The last entry was dated the day the ship went under, the day the crew entered the seam. It was 3 words, not a farewell, not an explanation, an instruction, left by someone about to go somewhere she did not expect to come back from, who had decided that what she needed to leave behind was an order and not a eulogy. Hold the threshold. He read it 3 times. Then he sat in the hum of the core, in the blue light of 190 people who had made a copy of themselves and left it in the dark, not knowing if anyone would ever come. And he listened to the ship breathe around him, the low sound of systems that had run for 91,000 years. The patient circulation of air kept at exactly the right warmth for a species that was no longer here. Above him, through Vespa's senses, the fleet held position, weapons ports shut, waiting, the way powerful things wait when they are sure the ending is already decided. "Vespa," he said, "how long until they can act?" Concord procedure requires an assessment window of at least 18 hours before physical intervention against a classified structure can be authorized. 18 hours. Yes, he looked at the columns. He thought about a captain who had used 3 words when 3 words were enough, and had them hold for 91,000 years. "Then we have 18 hours, he said. "Tell me the rest." And the memory core hummed a little louder than before, the way a thing hums when it is no longer waiting to be found, but waiting to be used. The decision came at hour 6, not because Eli reasoned his way to it, but because he stopped trying to reason his way to it, and the answer walked in on its own, the way answers do once you quit chasing them across the room. He sat in the high chair and looked at the fleet on the viewport. 6 ships. Ports still shut. Still so certain of themselves. He thought about the Sathari files buried in the archive, the ones in the slightly wrong format, the ones someone had failed to scrub or planted on purpose. He thought about the word for what they had done, written in clean grammar over the grave of 50 billion. He thought about 240 years of something knocking on a sealed door, and a galaxy that had heard it for 160 of those years, and agreed by the heavy inertia of not wanting to know, to call the sound nothing. He thought about what happens when you ignore a knock long enough. Eventually the door comes down. "Vespa," he said, "the broadcast system, the one that sent the tone when we touched the wall. What's its range?" "With full power, every active relay in Concord space at once. 320 inhabited systems inside a 6-hour propagation. The archive, all of it. The war, the Sethari meeting, the host, the seam, the knocking. Can you compress it into one package?" 3 seconds. "I have been preparing that package for 87,000 years, Vesper said. I did not know when the moment would come, so I refined it continuously. What to include, what order, what form the most species could read with the least prior context. I have had time to be thorough. Of course it had. Of course it had spent 87,000 years in the dark assembling a message for someone who had not yet arrived, because that was what it was. Devotion, with nothing to point at, sharpening itself in the silence until the thing to point at finally came. "If we send it," Eli said, "they can't unring it." "No, they'll come for us, faster and heavier than what's up there now." "Yes, and we can't fight a long war." "No. So we run." He looked at the star map, at the single point Vespa had set at the edge of the known, the interface, the seam. "And there's exactly one place they can't follow." Silence. not the careful kind, the kind that confirms a thing already understood. He sent one message first, to Marlon, not an explanation, not an apology. 5 words, do not be up top. He did not know if she would understand. He thought she probably would. She was the kind of person who understood things without needing them spelled out, and she had spent 4 days not answering orders she disagreed with, which was its own sort of message. Then he sat back and said, Vesper, broadcast. The ship moved, not toward the fleet, straight up. A vertical launch through the excavation shaft, through 70 meters of rock that 3 weeks of careful work had drilled and carved, and then out through the surface into the dark over Vorn Hollow, moving faster than anything that Old had any right to move, because Vesper had not spent 87,000 years merely surviving. It had spent them keeping every system at full capacity, which turned out to be considerable. The fleet reacted, signals leaping between hulls, voices crackling in Sithari and cheer across channels Vesper was still reading. Weapons ports opening, the 2 enforcement ships swinging to intercept. Vespa did not fight them. It broadcast. The package went out on every frequency at once, tight beam and wide beam and relay to relay, every method together. The archive it had spent 87,000 years assembling, compressed and formatted and gone, moving outward at the speed of light, and then faster along the relay net, jumping station to station, across Concord space. 320 systems in 6 hours. The enforcement ships fired. The shots hit, and the ship rocked, a real physical shudder that ran up through the chair and into Eli's spine. Vespa did not flinch. It absorbed the hit and kept climbing. Damage. Minimal. Warning ordnance. They want me intact for study. A pause. They will escalate. When they understand what we have done. About 4 minutes. Cross the system. In the camp's comm tent. Mylène was not up top. She had gone down the shaft 20 minutes before the launch, which she could not fully explain to herself, except that a human she had spent 30 days condescending to had earned, somewhere in the last 4 days, the benefit of the doubt. She rode out the launch braced against an archive wall with all 4 hands, and when the shaking eased, she pulled herself to a station and watched the broadcast leave. And she understood, before the fleet did, exactly what was propagating outward through her civilization at that moment. She watched the truth reach the first relay, then the second, then she stopped counting. Admiral Vane understood at 4 minutes, near enough. Eli watched it happen through Vesper's read of the enforcement channels. The moment the certainty went out of the clipped Sithari grammar, and something else came into it. The first real shot arrived a breath later, and it hit like a fist through the hull, and a whole section of corridor went dark on Vesper's display, and then came back as the backups took it. A deep structural groan ran through the ship. Not an alarm, just the sound of something very old being reminded. It was also very hard. It remembered. Vesper, how long to the seam at full burn? 11 hours. Can we make it? Unknown. A pause. Probably. I have been in worse. Once, the ship went through the fleet formation, rather than around it, because through was faster, and Vesper had apparently decided that was fine. It rolled as it moved, making itself a smaller target, a district-sized thing moving with a fluidity that should not have been possible, and was because whoever built it had understood that size and speed are not opposites if you build them right. The fleet came after them, and they came after them for 11 hours. Vesper did not run straight. It ran in angles, in evasions. Eli slowly understood were not random, but predictive, the ship modeling each gunner's timing and slipping through the space between their shots. A 91,000-year-old mind playing a faster game than anything in the fleet had ever practiced against. The ship took hits. Some of them he felt in his teeth. He said very little, because there was nothing useful to say, and Vesper did not need instruction, it needed time, and he gave it time by staying out of the way. And across the channels the broadcast kept arriving and could not be stopped, because to stop it, the Concorde would have had to shut down its own relay network, and its own relays were how it governed. The truth rode the machinery of the order it dismantled. There was a thing the fleet could not understand, and Eli watched them fail to understand it in real time. The ship that could have destroyed 6 vessels in the opening minute had not fired once. The archive it broadcast contained the coordinates of every Concorde vulnerability recorded across 91,000 years. The founding crimes, the buried meeting, every fracture line the Order had papered over, and humanity's ship had handed all of it, freely, to the very species that had erased humanity and had asked for nothing back. No terms, no vengeance, no demand. In the enforcement chatter, Eli heard an officer say, more than once in genuine confusion, that this was not how a defeated thing behaved. Because it wasn't. That was the whole of it. Mercy had never been the weakness the Concorde took it for. Mercy was the last thing humanity had, and it had chosen, 91,000 years ago, and again now, to spend it on them. They had lost the war in every way a war can be measured, 3 billion down to whatever walked into a closing door, and they had not lost it. They had ended it and stayed to hold the threshold for a galaxy that would spend 90,000 years calling them young. A thing that waits that long without breaking is not young. It is patient, and patience, in a human, is the most dangerous thing there is. An hour out from the seam, Malen reached Eli on a personal channel. Her voice was quiet and steadier than he had ever heard it. She was aboard a Concorde science vessel now, arguably the least safe person in the system, and she said she found she was not especially concerned about that. The broadcast reached the fleet's own relays 40 minutes ago, she said. They could not suppress it without silencing themselves. They did not silence themselves. It is out, Corin. All of it. The Administrative Corps has been issuing corrections for half an hour. The corrections are not being received well. A pause and something in her voice he had not heard from her before. The sound of a very old, very tired person setting down something heavy. There are species in the Concorde who are very upset. My own is one of them. Are you safe? No. I read the files when you were down here before the fleet came. I recognized the letters before you descended the shaft. My history says my people never touched the host. Too far, too small, too early. A breath. The archive says otherwise. And the grammar of the lie is mine. There was nothing to say to that, so Eli said nothing. Hold the threshold, Malen said, and the channel closed. The sim was ahead now, a marker on the viewport over a patch of empty space that looked like nothing, that was nothing to every sensor in the fleet, except Vesper's, which saw it for what it was. A door. Vesper was slowing. The crossing between spaces demanded a drop in velocity it could not avoid, and it was being made to perform that drop under fire, which it did with the calm of a thing that had survived worse than these 6 ships could imagine. Vesper, Eli said. The knocking. Is it still going? No. A pause. It stopped 40 minutes ago, the exact moment the broadcast began to propagate. It has not resumed. He stared at the marker. Something on the far side had heard. Something on the far side had stopped knocking. What do you think that means? 3 seconds. I think they always knew we would come eventually, Vesper said. And I think the knock was never an attempt to break through. A pause. I think it was a signal, telling us to hurry. The last thing to reach him before the crossing was a hail he had not expected. Not from the fleet, from the Administrative Corps itself, routed forward through the science vessel Malen was aboard, which meant she had carried it the final stretch by hand, from someone high enough that the request had weight and tired enough that the weight was showing. It was not a threat. That was the first strange thing. It was a question, and the voice that asked it belonged to an old member of the Sithari Council, and it came through with the flatness of a person who has been awake for a long time watching a thing they built come apart. You have given us everything, the voice said. Our founding, our worst hour, every weakness we spent 90,000 years hiding. You handed it to 320 systems and asked nothing for it. You could have destroyed the fleet in your first minute and did not. A pause. I do not understand, so I am asking. Before you cross, and I would like the truth. Why did you not erase us? We erased you. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he answered. And he did not raise his voice. Because the thing did not need volume. Because you're what's on this side of the door, he said. And the door has to be held for someone. It might as well be held for the people who are already here. He looked at the marker, at the nothing that was a threshold. Mercy wasn't ever weakness. It was the last thing they had. And they spent it on you. I'm not going to be the one who decides they were wrong to. The channel held a silence that was not empty. There is a thing your people used to say, the council voice said at last. It has surfaced in the archive. The captains said it. I do not fully understand it either, but it seems to be the whole of you, compressed. And it was Malen who said it, because the council member could not shape the human sounds and she could, 4 days of practice behind her. The pronunciation exact for once with no one there to correct. Hold the threshold, she said. And this time it was not an order left in the dark, and it was not a bitter thing said over a grave. It was aimed the other way now, back at her own people, an offer of the thing humanity had held alone for 91,000 years, extended at last to the ones who had buried them. A bridge, laid down by the one person who had read the files and not looked away. Hold the threshold, Eli said back. Yeah, that's the job. Then the ship crossed. One moment the fleet was behind them. The shots, the dead world falling away, the stars of the galaxy, spread out in every direction, 320 systems, still receiving a signal that would not stop arriving, simply because the ship that sent it was gone. And the next moment, something else. Something adjacent. The seam. The viewport cleared, and the dark on this side was not the dark of the other. It was lighter in some directions and heavier in others. A space with its own rules about distance and scale and light. Rules. Eli's eyes were already trying to find the pattern in, and finding it strange ones and beautiful, the kind that lived just on the wrong side of familiar. Vesper was quiet. So was he. Then it said his name. Eli. Yeah. Look ahead. He looked. There were lights. Not stars, not the ambient glow of the place. Moving lights. Structured. The kind that mean ships. A great many of them. And they were not arranged in a fighting spread. Not a wall thrown up to stop him. They were arranged in something more like a corridor. A lane of lights, wide enough to fly through. Pointed inward. Waiting. A thing that has the shape of a welcome. His throat closed. He kept his face still and did not entirely manage it. Vesper, he said. Level. More level than anything in the last 11 hours. How many? Counting. A pause. Still counting. The lights went on, deeper into the seam than the viewport could resolve. Further than the ship's sensors had finished mapping. Thousands. Vesper. They're still human. Aren't they? Not quite a question. 3 seconds. They are something, Vesper said. Something that began as human and has had 91,000 years to become. Whether that is still the word, I do not know. I will know more when we are closer. He sat in the high chair of the oldest human ship in existence, on the inside of a door that had been sealed for longer than any history the galaxy kept, and he watched the lane of lights hold steady around him. Not advancing, not challenging, only present, only burning, the way a thing burns when it has burned long enough that burning is simply what it is now. Behind him, in the galaxy, the signal was still spreading, station to station, system to system, the archive unfolding across 320 worlds, in a wave no one could stop, that had already reached too many to contain. That was already being read by species who had spent 80,000 years believing a comfortable thing and were holding the true thing in their hands for the first time. The Concord was coming apart. He knew it without seeing it. The fracture lines had been there for 91,000 years, covered over by careful language and patient silence, and the archive had found every one of them. And here on the far side, 91,000 years of human history that the galaxy had written over and buried and agreed to forget, was arranged in a lane of light and waiting, patient as stone, steady as something that had held this long, and understood that a little more time was nothing at all. The knocking had stopped when the truth went out, not because a door was breached, because the thing on this side had heard the one sound it had waited 240 years to hear, which was not a weapon and not a rescue, but simply proof that someone on the outside, finally knew. The knock had never been a fist trying to break through. It had been a hand on the other side of the wall, tapping, patient, telling whoever came to please, "When you come, come quickly." Eli thought about a captain who had ordered a ship out of a closing door and stayed. He thought about a coin, left face up in a drawer, and a colony called Hallowmere that was gone before the last campaign began, and a helm officer who stayed for people she no longer had anywhere to send home. He thought about 3 words at the end of a 12-year log, written by someone who had made a decision and recorded it, in the smallest number of words the decision required, and then walked through a door. The ship moved forward into the lane of light. The lights did not move to meet it. They only held, on either side, burning, the way something burns when it has been burning long enough that holding is simply what it is. He did not say anything. Sometimes 3 words are enough. Sometimes what you are holding is a threshold. And sometimes the threshold holds, and on the far side of the longest silence in the history of the galaxy, something that used to be human turns on every light it has and waits and lets you in.